United States reveals a new strategy for Africa that's focused on countering the influence of two longtime foes on the resource-rich continent. Turning a barren land into cash, farmers in Kenya's coastal region reap big by planting trees while conserving the environment. And a Congolese artist, Lutis, shows his duality in his music genre by mixing languages and sounds influenced by American and African culture. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. The administration of U.S. President Donald Trump has pulled back the curtain on a new strategy for Africa, one that is focused on countering Chinese and Russian influence on the resource-rich continent. The new plan is demanding more accountability for American aid. Patsy Widakuswara has more from the White House.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has long been courting African leaders at events like September's China-Africa Forum. Chinese-funded infrastructure projects are popping up all over Africa. At the conservative-leaning think tank, the Heritage Foundation, the administration launched a new strategy on Africa.
Well, Kim, thanks very much.
Officials say it's designed to counter China's growing power, as well as Russia's attempts to increase its influence in the resource-rich continent.
The predatory practices pursued by China and Russia stunt economic growth in Africa, threaten the financial independence of African nations, inhibit opportunities for U.S. investment, interfere with U.S. military operations, and pose a significant threat to U.S. national security interests.
Bolton said the goal of the strategy is to advance trade and commercial ties, counter the threat of terrorism, and ensure accountability for American aid.
We heard the speech. We'll take a look at the speech and look at the detail of the speech, and we'll give a comment to that. But we are happy to understand that finally America has a strategy that is purposeful towards Africa.
The new Africa strategy is in line with the Trump administration's foreign policy that portrays China as a strategic competitor. Some analysts see the us versus them approach as counterproductive, including Mike Fuchs from the left-leaning Center for American Progress.
We should be creating partnerships with countries in Africa based on our interests and how we can work together to pursue shared interests. This is not, again, a battleground between the United States and China, but framing it that way is going to, I think, leave a bad taste in the mouth probably of a lot of the leaders and the people, frankly, in Africa.
Bolton also warned the U.S. will re-evaluate its support for UN peacekeeping missions.
We will seek to streamline, reconfigure, or terminate missions that are unable to meet their own mandate or facilitate lasting peace. Our objective is to resolve conflicts, not freeze them in perpetuity.
The U.S. will also review aid to countries whose governance it finds unaccountable. Bolton singled out South Sudan, signaling that all aid may soon end for the war-torn country. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News at the White House.
Well, the United States is also rethinking its role in UN peacekeeping missions across Africa, with White House National Security Advisor John Bolton and Defense Secretary Jim Mattis looking to deploy U.S. forces and resources elsewhere. Bolton outlined the administration's new Africa policy on Thursday, saying the U.S. will no longer support unaccountable UN peacekeeping missions.
Our objective is to resolve conflicts, not freeze them in perpetuity. And we will not provide legitimacy to missions that give large payouts to countries sending poorly equipped soldiers who provide insufficient protection to vulnerable populations on the ground.
Well, Pentagon leaders are of a similar mindset, with Defense Secretary Mattis recently recommending the pullout of all U.S. peacekeepers from the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali. Now, for more on the U.S.-Africa peacekeeping missions, VOA's Carla Babb joins me live via Skype from the Pentagon. Hello, Carla.
Hi, Vincent.
Now, you know, some may get the sense that perhaps the U.S. is really pulling out its military support from the continent of Africa. Can we kind of put things in perspective here?
Well, I do want to stress that this is the peacekeeping mission with the United Nations, not necessarily the United States missions across the continent. But these leaders have been wanting to move around the resources. They've been actually pursuing it at the Pentagon since the attack in Niger last year that killed 4 American troops, 4 Nigerian troops, and a Nigerian interpreter. And so they want to pull out from these UN peacekeeping missions that they say aren't working. Bolton, the National Security Advisor, actually singled out the mission in the Western Sahara, saying that they've been there nearly 3 decades and they have yet to do the goal that they set out to do, and that is to set up and to have a referendum, a political referendum there. So while those changes are being made, and there are some changes at the Pentagon that kind of coincide with those, this isn't an ultimate blank slate push out of Africa, because while the United States is pulling out about 10% of its counterterrorism, 10% of its forces on the ground in Africa, most of those are counterterrorism men and women, they're also adding additional aid. We just heard from U.S. Africa Command that while troops are coming out of West Africa, more money is going in. The pledge for that G5 Sahel Joint Force has been increased from initially being $60 million to now more than $100 million. So there are lots of changes going on, but it's hard to say exactly whether it's a total pullout or whether it's just a refocus.
Now, for me, I get the feel like this is kind of a repudiation of the United Nations itself, because Bolton is saying that they don't want to, the U.S. doesn't want to keep just funding and supporting missions that are hopeless, are not really achieving any results. Instead, solve the conflict. Is that what
You're right, Vincent. Yes, this could be a really big blow to the United Nations peacekeeping mission, because keep in mind, the United States funds about 1/3 of the total budget for UN peacekeepers. They're by far the biggest donor. So if the United States starts pulling out of the peacekeeping missions in Africa and cutting its aid even further, that could really send a signal that these peacekeeping missions are going to be becoming smaller and smaller because they want to use the resources elsewhere. Bolton actually said, why should we have UN peacekeepers and fund that peacekeeping mission that has failed when the United States could use that support for economic help in these areas? And pointing many officials here at the Pentagon and at the State Department has said the economic situation in Africa is one of the biggest causes for counterterrorism in the first place, because people join these groups because they don't have a chance at economic prosperity.
Indeed, and indeed we hope the conflict will be resolved instead of having perpetual missions, peacekeeping missions. Carla, thank you very much for joining us today. That's VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb reporting live from the Pentagon, from Arlington, Virginia via Skype. Now, the United Nations Children's Fund says 15,000 children remain separated from their families or missing 5 years after conflict first broke out in South Sudan. More than 4 million people have been uprooted by the fighting. The majority of them are children. The UN agency noted that separated and unaccompanied children are more susceptible to violence, abuse, and exploitation, which makes returning them to their parents an urgent priority. Despite a fragile accord signed by the government and rebel groups in September, South Sudan is still struggling with ethnic grievances, and civilians bear the brunt of the violence and a cycle of revenge. An estimated 1.2 million children are acutely malnourished, the highest number since the conflict began. Some 2.2 million children are not receiving an education, giving South Sudan the highest proportion of out-of-school children in the world. Now, the Strasbourg's Christmas market has reopened on Friday in France after it was shut down for 2 days following this week's deadly shooting attack. French Interior Minister Christophe Castaner says investigators are determined to get to the bottom of why a Sharif Chekat shot and killed 3 people and wounded 13 others late Tuesday at the market.
There are no indications as of now that there were accomplices, but the investigation continues. It will continue until the end so that the entire truth comes out and every bit of security is guaranteed to the French people.
Well, police shot and killed the 29-year-old Shekhard, the suspected shooter, in the Strasbourg area Thursday following an intense manhunt. Authorities say Shekhard was on a watch list of suspected extremists. In a tweet Thursday, the Islamic State terrorist group claimed responsibility for the attack. France is no stranger to extremist attacks. A 2016 terrorist truck attack in Nice killed 86 people. Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook. So check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter and VOA Vince McCory. Still ahead on Africa 54, Congolese artist Lutis joins live to tell us about his music genre that is rooted in both Africa and American cultures. But first, a look at Friday's headlines.
U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton outlines the administration's new Africa policy, with the United States rethinking its role in UN peacekeeping missions across the continent. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, citizens maintain optimism that the December 23rd election will take place as scheduled, despite a fire in the capital, Kinshasa, that destroyed most of the voting machines intended for the city. Pretoria hosts Africa's first ever cannabis fair amid legal questions over the drug's decriminalization. Zimbabwe's President Emerson Mnangagwa delivers a speech at a party conference of the ruling party ZANU-PF. Finally, in Ivory Coast, painter Désiré Kofi combs the streets of Abidjan in search of damaged electronics to turn a growing e-waste problem into art.
Well, Nigeria's February 2019 national elections are a critical test, according to Thibault P. Naj, Jr., Assistant Secretary, Bureau of African Affairs, who testified at a U.S. House Committee on Foreign Affairs on Capitol Hill on Thursday. He said the conduct of the elections could have significant consequences for the democratic trajectory of Nigeria, West Africa, and the entire continent. Naj says the U.S. government will continue to support Nigeria so it can achieve its objective of holding free, fair, transparent, and peaceful elections that reflect the will of the Nigerian people. The U.S. will assist Nigeria through youth and civil society and democracy and governance programs, as well as help the country to strengthen its democratic institutions and processes. Secretary Naji expressed concerns about this prospect of violence.
I can tell you from my experience that I fear there will be some violence, as has been the case with previous elections, but I only anticipate localized violence, not nationwide conflict. We are already seeing increased tension as the election approaches, as politicians turn to identity politics to improve their popularity, with potentially serious consequences for national unity. Nigeria has weathered such tensions before, but the U.S. government takes the risk of any loss of life extremely seriously. While in Nigeria, I asked officials from both major parties to sign pledges that their candidates would conduct peaceful campaigns, and both major candidates have now signed such a peace pledge. In assessing potential hotspots for violence, we look at places that are historically volatile around elections, such as rivers and Borno states. We look at states that are currently tense, especially if state-level politics are contentious, like those in Benue, Plateau, as well as those in high-stakes locations with large populations, such as Kano.
Secretary Naji, who served as U.S. Charge d'Affaires in 2016 and Deputy Chief of Mission from 1993 to 1995 in Nigeria, says at the end of the day, only the Nigerian people can determine lasting solutions and a path forward toward peace and stability. Environmentalists have long reported that wood consumption, including logging and the use of charcoal, is a leading cause of forest degradation in Africa. In some of Kenya's coastal regions, recurring droughts have made the problem even worse. Now, farmers in those regions are now planting trees, putting their once barren land to use in a venture that enables them to earn a living and conserve the environment at the same time. Rylan Boer reports from Kilifi.
At Besulubutezo in Kilifi County, Kanze Kahindi Mbogo tends to her tree farm. She thins out the younger trees whose wood is now strong enough for her to sell for home building and making fences. The money she makes is for her 6 children.
I have been able to educate my kids, pay a couple of debts, and do lots of other things. I was also able to send one of my sons to college, and right now, he is a driver.
Before growing trees, putting food on the table was difficult in this land where droughts are common and crops often fail. On the coastline, people fish. Inland, many struggle with poverty, so they chop down trees to make charcoal. With the help of NGOs and entrepreneurs, farmers are learning how agroforestry can make them money and at the same time preserve the environment. One of those farms is Komaza, a Kenyan farm that started in California and is working with 14,000 farmers to plant drought-resistant trees for harvest, reducing the drive to deforest.
Farmers are able to nurture the seedlings into trees, and then the trees now become fully blown trees ready for harvest. Once they are ready for harvest, we have the operations team from the forestry department that go and identify trees that are ready for harvest. They agree with the farmers on a fair price, and then once the trees that are agreed on are identified, they are marked and they are harvested.
The farm trains farmers on efficient cultivation and selective harvesting. But not all farmers have the resources to plant a tree and wait for it to grow. So some farm subsistence crops among the trees. Researchers say this arrangement counters the effects of climate change.
Trees end up absorbing carbon dioxide when they are making their food. And therefore, essentially, the trees are actually getting to bring carbon from the atmosphere into the tree stem and therefore on land. So that basically means there is the co-benefit of reducing greenhouse gas emissions through more enhanced agroforestry systems.
For these Kenyan farmers, environmentalism begins to make sense when it starts to translate into improving livelihoods. Rael Ombur for VOA News, Kilifi, Kenya.
The British Prime Minister Theresa May is struggling to persuade European leaders to renegotiate Britain's deal to leave the European Union. A big majority of MPs say they will vote down the agreement if the Prime Minister doesn't secure concessions on this so-called Irish backstop. But Europe rejected any substantial changes at a summit in Brussels. The Prime Minister was further weakened this week after 1/3 of her own lawmakers voted against her in a leadership challenge. Here's Andrew Ridgewell with more on Brexit details, rather.
Back in Brussels, back to ask for more.
I don't expect an immediate breakthrough, but what I do hope is that we can start to work as quickly as possible on the assurances that are necessary. Thank you.
It will likely take more than assurances. Many British MPs back home object to the so-called Irish backstop, in effect an insurance policy that will keep either Britain or Northern Ireland locked into EU rules if no trade deal is agreed. Its purpose is to avoid any hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland for fear of reopening sectarian troubles. Dublin and Europe aren't backing down.
The deal that we have is the only deal on the table.
I think that it's important to avoid all ambiguity. We can't reopen a legal agreement.
Brussels says it will offer written assurances that it will try its best to reach a trade deal, but that's not enough for May's critics back home.
It has to be serious, and it has to be binding, and it has to be quite clear that the EU now has a decision to make, not us, they do. If you want a deal, you better damn well step up to the plate.
But analysts say Europe has moved on.
Brexit now is more of a British issue. It's really important now in the British news and in British politics. On the continent, it's not that important.
Theresa May's political future depends on it. Dozens of her own MPs say they will vote against the deal if the Irish backstop is still in place. That vote has now been delayed until January. Polls show momentum is building behind another referendum. Campaigners took to the River Thames today, claiming that with Parliament deadlocked, Theresa May's only lifeline is to send the decision back to the people. Europe wants to help Theresa May get her deal over the line, but not at any cost. And so both here in Brussels and in London, preparations are ramping up for Britain crashing out with no deal in just over 100 days' time. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, Brussels.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. In an African first, a cannabis expo without cannabis. The 4-day expo, which opened in South Africa's capital Pretoria on Thursday, was a stark illustration of the current legal grey area the industry occupies in the continent's most developed economy. In September, the Constitutional Court decriminalized the use and cultivation of cannabis in private space, but the decision legalizes its trade or distribution. Even displaying cannabis in public remains legally dubious. Opponents have long argued against the use of cannabis, citing medical research which suggests a link between heavy use of marijuana and psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia. Well, next up, Christmas tree farmers in the U.S. have launched a social media campaign to get Americans to buy real trees this season. Artificial trees are once crude imitations of an evergreen are now so realistic that it's hard to tell they are fakes, even though many are conveniently pre-strung with lights and can fold up for storage and to the push of a button. Between 75% and 80% of Americans who have a Christmas tree now have an artificial one. To combat this trend, Christmas tree farmers have joined forces as the Christmas Tree Promotion Board and are now running a social media ad campaign this holiday season to tout the benefits of a real evergreen. The campaign, called It's Christmas, Keep It Real, is funded by a 15-cent fee that tree farmers pay for each tree they harvest. Well, and finally, in the West, baby gifts this holiday season have taken a lead from the society's playbook. What's trending now and gaining momentum is anything gender neutral. Look around, you won't see much pastel blue and pink as color coding baby boys and girls is now seen as outdated. Saddles are a big on-trend gift item this holiday season. It is a soft wrap that allows the baby to feel cocooned. Unicorns are also trending, but in neutral colors. Items that help children grow to their full developmental potential are in great demand, as are gifts which engage the interest of adults as well. And that's what's trending today. Well, it's Music Makers Friday, and today we introduce to you rapper, author, composer, and lyricist Ngagbo Lulu Curtis, better known as Lutis. He's from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Lutis, welcome to Africa 54, my friend.
Welcome. Yes. Welcome Sunday.
Great. Now, I looked at some of your music. You have quite a mix, quite a blend of stuff you do there. Tell me how you got pulled into music and what really influenced you.
Actually, I was born in a family where I had both of my parents very passionate with music. My own mom was singing in the choir, in the Catholic choir for more than 10 years. During her high school studies and university, she has been singing. And I grew up in this environment, hearing my aunties and my little sisters singing music, my own mom. And my father was like a big fan of American music, James Brown, some French and Spanish, Italian music. So I started playing music, hearing music when I was just a baby, and I still have some picture of me like with some close to radio, dancing, and I was really from the beginning, from my childhood, being a fan of music.
Yeah. Now, personally, what did you want to become when you were young? You know, from all that, what did you want to do?
Like, actually, I was seeing my father as a role model, but you see, I had just had a double culture because I grew up in Congo, but I also had a chance to live some few years here in the United States. So that just gave me a duality of choices, like who should I become when I grow up? Like, I was looking at some sports athletes. I was also looking at some famous journalists. I was looking at some drama actors. I was kind of blend into culture, into cultural environment, but also, yeah, so.
Now, we want to watch one of your videos, Instrument. Probably want to introduce it, just briefly what it is about.
So basically, Instrument is just this, it's the single that I just released on July 2018, and then this gives a message to those, it gives message to those pastors, to those cult ministers that just use the power that they had to the population, to the public, to the audience, to take profit of them instead of giving the real message. And then that was the intent of the song.
Let's watch it. Let's watch it.
Okay.
Mais je vous assure que je vais dénoncer. Je sais qu'on va me détester. Mais je vous assure que je vais dénoncer. Je mange la paix, je chante la joie. Devrais-je porter l'épée ou plutôt porter ma croix? Plusieurs se haïront, se trahiront au nom du Christ. Serviteur en temps de grâce et truand en temps de crise. Le diable n'est plus dans l'Engana mais aussi dans l'église. Nous chantent les choses éphémères plutôt que la terre promise. Quand on entend leurs témoignages, on en a de la peine. Exposés dans leurs clips vidéo, on y croit à peine. Ils ont prêché l'amour mais ont mangé la haine. Que portent-ils dans leur quel est leur ADN? Comment peut-on chanter Jésus et danser au pas du diable? Ne pas prêcher les Écritures mais débiter des fables. L'épée n'est plus pour le mal.
Now, this is a powerful message. You are actually doing a rap, kind of a hip-hop style, but you're talking about Christian pastors who may be taking advantage of their position to exploit.
Exactly.
What made you want to do this, very quickly?
Because I've been experiencing it. I've been watching it on TV.
Yeah.
And then I was kind of, what is happening right here?
Yeah.
Why should those people do things like that? Yeah. They should be working like honestly, do things like in respect of people, in respect of what they really have to do, and that really inspired me. Because I was growing in an environment where people was just abusing it. I was doing too much, and I was like, okay, I think it's time for me to just say something about it.
Powerful message. We want to leave it at that so that we can listen to more of his music. And well, that's Lutis. I want to thank him as a rapper, author, composer, and lyricist. And so at this point, we end our show there. I want to listen to more of Instrument, a music video by Lutis. From all of us here in Washington, have a great weekend.
Tapage, responsabilité, rime avec ministère, parfois les plus indignes sans leur dignitaire. Les portes du ciel sont fermées et on ouvre celles du monde. Les richesses de la terre et non du ciel. La vraie parole recule car les faux messages abondent. L'orgueil comme fièvre les a rendus tièdes. Tu n'es qu'un instrument au service du Tout-Puissant et tu invites bêtement devant pour le Dieu vivant. Tu n'es qu'un instrument au service du Tout-Puissant et tu invites bêtement devant pour le Dieu vivant. Au lieu de prêcher les sorciers, montre-nous la croix. Des doctrines plus que des lois, qu'en est-il de la foi? Car là-haut sur la croix, tout était...
Welcome to English in a Minute. Lots of items are made from gold, like jewelry, coins, and medals.
Golden opportunity.
This sounds like a strange thing to be made of gold.
Jonathan, are you as excited as I am about the holiday next week?
I might be more excited. The holiday is a golden opportunity for me to catch